Welcome to another episode of Shift with Elena Agar. In this conversation, I am joined by Corinne Gavlinski. She's the founder of the GAV Group, and we explore the concept of lazy leadership and what it truly means to lead with intentionality. Corinne also shares her transformative journey from finance to healthcare to executive coaching, revealing pivotal moments, what she calls identity jolts, that redefined her approach to leadership and personal growth. So check out the episode. It's super interesting. She's got a really nice story. And as always, please subscribe, share, like, and come back for more. Corinne, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Thank you so much, Elena. I'm delighted to be here.
Very excited to chat, very excited to dive into concepts of lazy leadership. So I'm really curious what that's about. But before we do that, take me back to your career story, just as far back as you want to go. Just kind of fill me in and my audience in terms of, where you've been, where you headed, where you are today.
Yep, great. I'd love to. I started my career in finance, actually, and had about 13 years in credit card management. And I have to be just completely transparent. I had a wonderful leadership development process through 3 different companies I worked with in finance, and I didn't appreciate any of it at the time. I was put through my paces as a leader and really had to focus on leading in different areas. And then at least twice in my career, I had what I call an identity jolt. I was part of a RIF on 2 different occasions, the first of which was just devastating. I think my ego took most of that bruising. And the second time, I really wasn't very surprised. And I think those types of jolts in your personal how you see yourself personally really impact where you go with your career. And on both of those occasions, it made me really take stock of where do I want to go with my career? And maybe unlike others, I pivoted quite deliberately and rather extremely. I moved from finance into healthcare the first time, which might have seemed like an abrupt right-hand turn to some, but was really me taking a bet on myself. I started from scratch. I left finance as a vice president and really started at the ground level back in healthcare and built another career almost in healthcare and worked with a series of young startups to help them build and scale their commercial teams. So account management, marketing, sales ops. And then I had another identity jolt and started to think about what did I want to do now? And because I identify so completely with who I am at work, and I had just recently experienced a huge loss of both of my parents, that loss impacted me in ways I probably still don't fully understand, but it really changed how I think about time. And I started to think about what type of leadership legacy I was leading and whether I was indeed investing in the places that I would want to be remembered by. Sounds a little dramatic, but when you lose both parents in quick succession, things shift. You have a jolt. And that's really what led me to start the GAV Group. It's sometimes said that you teach that which you most need to learn. And so paying attention to being intentional, paying attention to where you want to make an impact is something that's important to me. And I started working with executive leaders to do just that in the GAV Group.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. As you're speaking, I'm like, I love talking to my guests because I always feel like it's like a mini therapy session for me. Because like sometimes I talk to people and I'm like, I feel like I'm going through like some kind of shift in my life as well. And then, and it's just interesting to kind of things come up for me personally and like selfishly. And I just like, it's interesting to have these conversations and the timing that we have them and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's interesting because when we, I think at different parts of our lives, we experience these shifts of, and that we want to make. And sometimes they're forced. Sometimes they are, inspired,
by choice.
Motivated. Choice. Yeah. Sometimes it's just, exactly. And it's always like these, these moments in our lives when something happens, like big shifts that happen out like that, in your case, it was the passing of your parents,
Yeah.
that really make us rethink how we operate, and I just wonder, as you're saying this, is like, like how can we more consciously come to this point, so like in your case, there were some things that has happened, but if somebody's listening to this is like, how do we actually consciously make those choices versus waiting for something to happen to make those choices?
Yeah. Yeah. It all comes down to, we talk a lot in leadership about intentionality. It's not a unique concept to me or to the GAV group. But what I mean by that is it's really about the very unsexy choices that we make every day, every week, every month, and we pay attention to doing small things very well. One of the biggest mistakes that I regret and that I'm trying to change, I did not focus on my team members really until awfully late in my career.
Mm,
Like many, I was quite self-centered. I was all about my own ambition, my own drive
mm,
to get ahead. And when I started leading people, I was still mostly in it for myself. And I can admit that now. I would never have admitted that in the past, but it wasn't until, gosh, I had a particularly strong leader who truly was what I would call a servant leader. And I think he opened my eyes to, you can prosper when your team prospers. And if you're not committed to doing the things with your team to help them lean into their own talents and grow, by extension, you too are not going to lean
mm-hmm.
into your talents and grow. And so I think that is possibly one of the biggest drivers for me today. And it's one of the tenets that I speak with clients about constantly.
Mm. So let's dive into the lazy leadership concept. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Lazy leadership is a fun phrase to say, but also it's something I say about leaders who have gotten distracted and lured into the pervasive reactive leadership mode. It does not mean they're not working hard. It does not actually mean they're lazy. It means they're distracted and they've taken their eye off the ball of what they really intend to do. So if they slow down, get quiet, and think about what they really want to make an impact on in their leadership, they would say something very different than what their actions are showing. And so, lazy leadership is a concept that we talk about with our clients that is really about having that internal barometer to recognize whether you're not being intentional. The truth of the matter is that no one is an impactful leader all the time. But my clients are highly accomplished and have experienced impactful leadership. And they recognize when they've slipped into one of the other zones. And they recognize that because cues are happening. Yes, they may have an internal sense that something's off, but also they're recognizing that they're exhausted, that they're on this frenetic wheel of just fighting fires, that they're suddenly canceling meetings with their team or during one-on-ones. They're pushing off hard conversations. These are all little cues that might give them the sense of, I might be in chaos zone. I might be in disengagement zone, or I might be in erosion zone.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, again, like as you're speaking, I'm kind of reflecting on my own leadership style and how I manage people in the past. And, it's and I feel like the thing you said in the beginning, you're like, maybe you're there, like you were there for like your own growth, right?
Yeah.
And being in this like management train, like, I mean, I help managers be better managers, right? So like, it's like, teach the thing you want to become type thing. So
Yes.
I do understand like all the concepts and, and the impact of great, people management and leadership and all of that. And it's still hard, even for me. I mean, I admit it, like even it's still hard when you're managing a team, you have demands, from the upper leadership to actually pause and do all those things, right? And so I guess the question becomes like, I mean, there's no perfect leader, right? Like we're all always growing and so on. But I guess if you are to choose, like to choose high impact activities that you can do as a leader, like
Hmm.
what are some non-negotiables that you would say that you've seen with your, in your work with clients that are like, listen, even if you're just having a crappy day as a good leader, like here's some non-negotiables to focus on.
Yeah. I think for every leader, it might be a little different. I can speak about some of the things I talk with my clients about. And then it's a little bit of pick and choose what matters most. The thing that these leaders do that are highly impactful leaders is that they preserve time to focus on what matters the most. Now, to your point, that doesn't mean perfectly all the time. That means over the course of a day or a week, they're intentional about focusing on those small things. So those small things might include some non-negotiables like holding one-on-ones, not canceling them. That's a super
Hmm.
simple one. Um, Finding the time to ensure that you're communicating with absolute clarity and that you're checking for understanding. It's funny to me how so many leaders sometimes say, this is a bit of an aside, but it's funny to me how so many leaders say, "Oh yeah, I've communicated the expectations for my team, or I've communicated the goals." And my very next question is, how do you know that your understanding of good is the same as your team's understanding of good?
Hmm.
So that's what I mean by making sure you're not just communicating, because every leader communicates, but communicating for understanding. So that may be non-negotiable.
Hmm.
Um, Attention to relationships is something that I work on with almost every executive I work with. Relationships with investors, boards, the CEO, if it's not the CEO I'm working with, peers, customers, employees. Those relationships are incredibly important the more senior you become in an organization. And tending to those relationships is even more important. So perhaps it's mapping out how well each of your critical relationships is progressing, giving yourself a letter grade perhaps, and identifying one or two things that you need to do with each individual to continue to build that relationship. So that may become non-negotiable.
Hmm.
Prioritization is a fourth thing that I tend to focus on with almost every client. Just getting super clear on what is the real priority to succeed in achieving your goals versus what is the urgent crisis of the day. And are they connected to one another?
Yeah, no, I like these. I think the whole setting expectations and like what you're communicating, do people actually understand what that means,
Mhm.
like in their own words? I think I mean, I see this all every week, like if
Yeah.
not every day, in companies. Like it's the biggest challenge. And again, I think because when we don't make time for those one-on-ones, when we don't make time, it becomes like you're just passing through like a train, just passing through a
Yep.
station, and you're like throwing out your luggage, but it's like, are people actually picking it up? Like, are
Yeah.
people understanding what is it that you're trying to do? And then I think another thing that you address indirectly is that, these relationships that we build as leaders are becoming so important because we often see silos form and
Yes.
a lack and just like barriers to communication across board. And so I
Yep.
think because some leaders don't invest in those relationships and don't keep the communication flowing, and they're just kind of like alone in the high tower by themselves, or they're like not really creating a system of
Yep.
transparency and just relationships basically.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. High impact leaders don't put off addressing conflict.
Mm.
High impact leaders don't kick the can down the road to having a tough conversation with maybe one of their employees. They address it. And they address it in the moment because it's so much more powerful when you're addressing it in the moment rather than 30 or 45 days later when it's after the fact and you're trying to go back and patch something up or you're trying to go back and unravel some conflict that has been created. I think the number one thing that leaders lack today is time. They have tremendous time scarcity. And what I hear increasingly from those that I work with is that they really want that exclusive, um, partner who is high trust and allows them the time to strategize, to think quietly, to role play, to game plan, and even to plan the next big move. And I don't mean that they're leaving their company. I just mean maybe they're making a big move within their own development. Maybe they're making a big move in terms of their own company. Maybe they want to try a new strategy with their team that has some risk to it. So, working through those issues is something that high impact leaders do.
Mm. What's been like some of the tougher conversations you've had to have with leaders about,
Mm,
because because your job is essentially part of it is like bringing awareness maybe to
yep.
some things, uncovering certain things. So what are, give me a couple of examples of, tough conversations you had to have and how was
Yeah.
the reaction from the leader?
Yeah. Oh, this is a great question. I love it. Like all executive coaches, I have a certain style. I think one of the reasons people work with me is that I am a no bullshit, pardon my French, leader. I am gonna match their intensity. I'm incredibly direct most times, and yet I've stood in their shoes. And so I think one of the things that clients most appreciate about me is that I'm not afraid to show them the mirror that says, "Are you sure you're doing what you say you're doing?" So some of the toughest conversations I've had to have with people are the ones that go something like, "You have said to me multiple times that these are the important things to you, that these are the non-negotiables, and you're describing your behavior, which is X, Y, and Z. How do those align?" And most often they don't. And so it's showing that mirror of, you said this, you are acting this way. Where is the chasm, and how do we close that chasm? And do you even recognize that there is one in the first place? So that's a hard conversation to have. Another hard conversation to have is highly accomplished leaders tend to almost revere exhaustion. They think that by working to exhaustion and taxing themselves mentally is almost a badge of honor. And I say this because I'm quite a bit like this too. I am very driven by what I accomplish. Almost every person I work with is the same.
Mm.
And so reflecting back to them the toll that may be taking on them personally, the toll that may be projecting onto their team, is a hard conversation to have. No leader wants to see that mirror, but it's a delicate conversation and it takes a lot of trust, but it's very powerful when it happens.
Mm.
I think those are two
Yeah.
of the most common areas.
It's tough. It's tough because yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the hardest thing is like to face yourself, I think, in any situation, especially leadership and listen, leadership is not, it's not for everybody, honestly.
It is
I know a lot
not.
of, I know a lot of people who are might be great, but they just, they just don't want to be a leader. Some people
Yeah.
that are, want to be, but just they just can't be. I really don't think
Yeah.
leadership is. Again, maybe this is right now. Maybe this will change, but right now, I don't think leadership is something that necessarily can be taught. I think a big part of leadership is who you are as an
Mm,
individual. I think
mm,
I think there's certain base characteristics and specific internal drivers that one has to have in order to be a leader. I think then you can learn how to be a better leader. But I think there's certain aspects, like for example, like a character trait could be, somebody who holds themselves at a high regard, like in high, what's the word? Not high regard. What's the word I'm looking for? Like has high expectations for themselves about how they perform. I think this is again like a very personal opinion, obviously, but and I think that there's a level of grit and resilience that a human being has to have in order for them to be a leader. There's
yeah.
certain level of empathy and ability to, influence and build relationships that I think a lot of time is innate
Yeah.
and is part of a character. And then you can make those better. But I think there are some people that just, they just don't have the base, and there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, what are your
I
thoughts
don't,
on that?
yeah, I don't disagree. I would add that I think leadership has to be modeled. And one of the great advantages of the early career that I had that I was explaining is that I got to see more senior leaders than myself model behavior of leadership over many times over. So I think my first job, I worked for a company called MBNA America, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was a very significant credit card bank at the time. I'm dating myself. It was purchased by Bank of America years and years and years later. The thing that was beautiful about that company is it had a very strong culture of leadership development. I had 7 jobs in 6 years. So that means I had 7 different bosses. And those bosses modeled leadership behavior for better or worse. Some were significantly better than others, but I learned from that. And so the thing that I talk with young leaders about, although I don't typically work with them in my practice all that often, but when I'm coaching a young person, I'm talking to them about making that shift from being a trusted executor of work to someone who must develop their people to execute work. That's a pretty big mindset shift that not everyone has the benefit of someone else modeling for them. And
Mm,
so I think that's the divide. And let's face it, not many young people in their 20s and 30s have the type of early career that I had. That's gone from our environment now. And so they may only be at a job 1 or 2 years, some of them not even that long. They don't have the opportunity to see many different leaders approach leadership differently,
mm,
take the good, discard the bad, and think about who they want to be as leaders.
yeah.
And even very senior executives, I often will say to them, how do you want to be viewed as a leader? What would you want people to say about you? And how do you think people view you today?
Mm,
And if there's a disconnect between those two things, then how do we close that?
mm. Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think the modeling piece is so important. And, the whole idea of management and leadership just got a bad rap because we don't have enough great models of
It's true.
leadership
It's
in the
true.
workplace. I've been really fortunate to have some really great leaders in my career, and I think that's, yeah. So like I always like now, like every other leader, I compare to these people that
Of
I'm like,
course.
because I see different types of leadership. And yeah, and I guess for me personally, that's what gives me hope. I'm like, no, 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 good leaders exist. Like
Yeah.
there is good practice that you can do with that. But then people who've never had it, like young people, like I work with a lot of obviously young managers as well. And you're right. It's like it's very hard for them to imagine. Like you
Yep.
can't just read in a book
No.
like you could maybe get some ideas
Sure.
maybe, but
Sure.
it's very different than experiencing being an employee under a great leader versus like listening to a podcast. Or you're right,
Without
it's a
question.
yeah,
Without
it's
question.
it's a very
There's
different experience.
nuance to leadership, isn't there?
Mm,
That's
yes.
hard to teach.
Yeah.
The I just had this conversation with someone the other day. The difference between saying to someone, I don't agree, and here's what I think, and here's why, is very different than a conversation that says, I don't know why we've always done it that way. That's so stupid. We really hold ourselves back,
Mm,
and I don't agree at all, and I'm just not going to do it. They're essentially saying similar things, not entirely the same, but similar things. But it's the nuance in the delivery that is so important for young people to learn and understand. And actually, even some very mature, very experienced leaders need to learn this as well. And that I think, can only be done by seeing someone do it elegantly
yeah.
or intentionally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what else? It also takes time. So when you're with a lead, depending on how long you stay with that leader, it
Yeah.
takes time to because sometimes they'll make, I'm just reflecting on like one of the leaders that I've had, she was phenomenal. She still is. And, you know, sometimes like, why is she doing that? Like, why did she make that decision? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
I would disagree in my own head and be like, I don't think it's a good idea. And then over time, you're like, oh, because I didn't know something that she knew, that like there's certain
Right.
information that's not available to us as employees, and we
That's
just
right.
have to trust
That's
with
right.
what that, and this, so it builds over time. And when you spend time with a leader, and in this particular case, I worked with her for over 4 years, I think, and over time, I've developed such high regard and respect. And I still talk to
Mhm.
her, and I say, and tell her, Renda, I said, I thought about you today because this came up in a conversation with a team member, and I remembered how you handled it, and I used that as an example. And like,
Yeah.
but it took time. And I
Yep.
think that's another thing, that the workplace is such a rotating door for so many
Yes.
young people, but they don't even get a chance to
Yeah.
experience the long-term impact of a good leader and learn from watching them over periods of time of how they make decisions and why they make those
That's
decisions.
right. That's right. And from a leadership standpoint, the thing I talk most with executive leaders about is how are you communicating why and how you handled it that way?
Mm,
So imagine a world where your leader in this example that you just gave had come to you and said, Elena, I want to tell you why I did that the way I did and what result I was trying to achieve by handling it that way. So that's kind in my lexicon, I call that the debrief, right? So there are times when leaders have to swoop in and fix something quickly. Maybe there's a problem with a customer, or maybe there's a, an investor or a board member who's particularly dissatisfied with something, and something very quickly has to happen, and that leader has to take over for one of their people. If you don't do that debrief, the person, you're going to erode trust with your person, and they're not going to understand why you swooped in the first place and why what they were doing was so wrong. They will assume they were so wrong and you thought you knew better. But if you take 15 minutes to say, hey, Elena, I just want to tell you, I know I stepped in right there. I felt like I needed to do that because of this reason. The way I handled that was this way. And I did that so that I could achieve this outcome. If someone said that to me in my young career, I would have been like, oh, I get it. Great.
mhm.
Now I understand why they had the approach that they have, and I can try to do that the next time. But if no one takes the time, if a leader doesn't take the time to just 15 minutes of time to
Yeah.
explain that to someone, resentment can grow, distrust can grow, misunderstandings can blossom, right? So,
Mm.
high impact leaders take the time for the 15-minute conversation.
Yeah. It's mentorship. That's what it is. It's mentorship. It's
It
it's
absolutely
that's
is.
it's mentorship. And yeah, it's just so powerful, because I've, again, like, I've had such great leaders in my career, and it's so powerful to the impact that you make as a leader on that person. And I
Yeah.
think it's like, I think that maybe that's the thing. Maybe if, people listening to this, I think, if you're a leader, just try it. Try it, because the impact is so rewarding that
Mm-hmm.
you're like, you want to keep doing it, because it's just, because you
Such a
understand the impact,
Yeah, it's
the
amazing to see
positive
someone
impact.
succeed on your team.
Yeah.
Amazing. We should all want to have a very clear set of potential successors. And I
Yeah.
think leaders in general fail to do that. And the best leaders, the ones that stay in the impact zone, create that type of succession.
Mm. And how do you see, with everything that's going on in the workplace, and with all the technology and all the AI and all the talk and
Mm,
all the, just the shrinking of a company, essentially, it's what
yeah,
it seems like, right? The
yeah.
roles are continuously changing. How is leadership, how should they be adapting? Do you think it's going to change? Do you think the core of leadership is going to stay the same? What are your thoughts on the next couple of years, let's say?
You know, I think leadership is going to change. I think there's always going to be a need for critical human thinking, human connection. I don't think AI can replace authentic relationships. Um, and when we really boil down leadership, it really is about those connections for productivity, for advancement, for development. you can link almost every activity of business back to the strength of the relationship you have with people. And I think there's a component of that, sort of that authentic, empathetic human experience that's going to be difficult to replace. Now, that said, certainly some of the more routine aspects of leadership can more easily be replaced. And time will tell how that happens. I think leaders need more support than ever to really embody that connection and help their team members grow that muscle as well. And not a lot of leaders think about that because they're too
Yeah.
busy fighting the fire of the day. And so it's sort of that pause of, who am I building? Who am I helping
Mhm.
grow? Who am I elevating? And where am I developing connection?
Mm.
And I don't mean to sound woo woo. I am not a woo
Yeah.
woo executive coach by any stretch of the measure. I am all about action and getting things done and walking your talk. If you say something's important to you, then let's get into action around it.
And yeah, I think if anything, we're starting to see that, the relationship piece, the connecting with others is actually good for business because I
Hmm.
think, we just forget that business is people, and if you don't invest in people, and I think the thing is that over the years, in the past, let's say take it 5, 10 years back, we're kind of able to get away with things because it's like, maybe, for example, like today we have more generations, like 5 generations, I think, in a workplace, right? Like, so the approach to how we manage everybody is different. We have the
So different.
technology, we have so many factors that are influencing the way that we now need to adjust to leadership and
Yeah.
create space for these things for us to relearn or unlearn and relearn how we
Yeah.
lead because things are different. So if you're somebody who is been in their career 30, 40 years,
Yeah.
things have shifted and you have to shift with that. And I think,
Dramatically.
dramatically. Yeah. So I think that's the change. And so it's like, so yes, like this, you might have been able to get away with in the past, but with all the factors influencing the way we work and just workplace in general today is requiring us to think differently. And I think that's the hard part because we got used to doing things like, well, it's been great. I've been a great leader for 20 years,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're like bulldozed by all these factors that you didn't even see coming or,
Yep.
showed up at your door unannounced,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So,
Humans love pattern and habits, right? That's
mm,
how we're wired. And so the things that got us the success in our careers are the things we tend to keep doing. And without a thinking partnership to hold up that mirror to say, is this really the way you mean to behave? Allows leaders to rest on maybe some bad habits that did indeed help them get them where they are, but are no longer relevant to the conversation of today's corporate environment. To your point, 5 generations in the workforce, everybody has a very different perspective and point of view about how they approach things. So if leaders are self aware enough to want that type of partnership, if they are, if they care about how they are perceived as a leader and they want to be an impactful leader, they should do the thing that I never did. And I was a fool for not doing it. I never sought what I believe is a strategic advantage of having external counsel, external
mm.
thinking partners. I just never did that. I don't know if it was probably never offered to me, and I never sought it on my own, which was a huge missed opportunity for me.
And as you kind of, continue with your work, how do you keep yourself accountable to make sure that you are showing up in that, in that
Mhm.
leadership lens today with your clients? Like, are there habits or routines that you do?
Yes, and the number one thing is I've got to walk my own talk. If I
Mm,
believe this, then I have to continuously be evaluating, am I operating in the impact zone? Am I doing the most possible to support my clients and how they are leading? Am I supporting them in what they want, not maybe what I want for them?
Mm.
That's a hard thing to do.
That's a hard
And
one. I was about to
I will
say, yeah.
often reference it. I will say to them, I'm putting aside what I might in this moment want for you because it's not what you have said you want.
Mm.
So let's focus on what you want. And I will narrate through my own discomfort of I want something for them that maybe they don't want. So walking my talk is the first thing. I'm a big believer that if you're going to do the type of work that my firm does, you better be doing the same thing for yourself. So I have not one, but two coaches for myself. One works with me on building my business, and the other works with me and my own leadership. And so I put my money where my mouth is. I hire my own coaches every year. Sometimes I change them, sometimes I keep them the same, but I'm always continuously seeking that outside counsel. And then the last thing I do is continue to learn and grow in my own field. So I'm not going to rest on the habits that maybe I've rested on in the past. I'm going to continue to look at what's novel. Are there better ways to do things? And how can I bring new techniques and practices to those that I work with? So I'm big on that. And the last thing I'll say is maybe a little unusual in today's day and age, but I like to work with my clients in person. Um, we make it a habit to meet every client in person and do at least one session remotely. Um, or remotely for us, we go to them.
Mhm.
All the teamwork that we do is on site somewhere. So
Mm.
that leader, if they are a remote team, will often gather the team for a kickoff meeting or a strategy meeting, and we go to them. So having that face-to-face time is really important and something we believe in, which is not so much the norm anymore.
Mm.
Now, we still do our regular sessions remotely, but we make the point to see each other in person.
Yeah, I think it's super super impactful. I think it's going to become even more impactful with just us becoming more automated in many ways and
Yeah.
more online and all of that and more disconnected in some ways. I think it's time to like double down on the in person, on the relationships in person and so on.
Yeah.
I'm also doubling down on that and in the work that I do because it's that much more impactful and I think it's going to be that much because also like when you're online and you're still distracted like
Yeah.
you're subconsciously you are versus in person it's just different. There's an exchange of energy. I mean, I'm preaching to
Yes.
the choir, so
Yes.
I to all that is to say, yes, I think that's going to become more important. So it's great to hear that you're doing
Yeah.
that. Where can people find you? Where, if they want to reach out or learn more about your services or just kind of follow your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find us at thegavgroup.com. And GAV is just an abbreviation of my last name, Gavlinski, which is a mouthful. They can also download, we have a free diagnostic that's available to any of your listeners who may be interested in reading a little bit more about lazy leadership. We'll provide a link in the show notes, but they can download a document that takes them through the 4 quadrants of lazy leadership and an assessment that they can take on where they may be today and how to get out of it if they are not in the impact zone that they want to be in, how they can work. And that starts with the team. So we start with the leader and his team or her team, and we work from that aspect forward.
Beautiful. Corinne, thank you so much. All of this will be in the show notes. I appreciate your time today and your wisdom, and you got me to think about some things that I do, and it was a good reflection conversation from you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Elena. It's been my pleasure to be here. I'm so happy to have done it. And yes, we will chat again anytime.